Hello. In a series of biblical studies, we are going next to Deuteronomy chapter 17, focusing on the authority that by God's law was given to Old Testament church courts and their rulers. And now, so I start reading at verse 8 here. If there arise a matter too hard for thee in judgment, between blood and blood, between plea and plea, and between stroke and stroke, being matters of controversy within thy gates, then shalt thou arise and get thee up unto the place which Jehovah thy God shall choose. And thou shalt come unto the priests the Levites, and unto the judge that shall be in those days, and thou shalt inquire, and they shall show thee the sentence of judgment. And thou shalt do according to the tenor of the sentence, which they shall show thee from that place which Jehovah shall choose. And thou shalt observe to do according to all that they shall teach thee, according to the tenor of the law which they shall teach thee, and according to the judgment which they shall tell thee, thou shalt do. Thou shalt not turn aside from the sentence which they shall show thee, to the right hand nor to the left. And the man that doeth presumptuously, in not hearkening unto the priest that standeth to minister there before Jehovah thy God, or unto the judge, even that man shall die, and thou shalt put away the evil from Israel. And all the people shall hear and fear, and do no more presumptuously. Now, this is pretty serious stuff here. The people of God, the Old Testament church, were told to, by all means, listen to the authoritative sentences of their church courts. And in case of refusing to heed sentences, the death penalty could be imposed merely for not heeding those sentences. But looking at the whole scripture, Old Testament and New, that does not mean that they're rulers of the church as set up in the law of Moses, church and state acting together at that point in the nation of Israel, the judge and the priests, the Levites. That does not mean they were infallible, that they could never make mistakes. We see this in abundant Old Testament examples. Jeremiah versus the unfaithful priests he contended with. Jesus against the Sanhedrin and the chief priests. Paul prosecuted by their high priests in the Acts of the Apostles. Show that the authority of the courts of the church is quite consistent with their fallibility. And notice one important thing. In the Old Testament, the courts could impose sanctions such as going to the limit of putting people to death. In the New Testament, the church courts do not have authority to put people to death. Their ultimate sanction is to cast people out of the church. But it's not like there's some sort of footnote that, well, they only really have this authority, this power to impose penalties if they are right. I mean, of course, certainly if they wrongly impose a penalty of death or exclusion from the church, God does not approve of that or like that. But on the other hand, the people need to know that in general, this is an authoritative set of rulers of the church whose decisions in general are to be obeyed. And if someone is unjustly under some sort of sanction by the church, Old Testament or New, the people in general can't necessarily know even that this person was unjustly convicted, can they? Well, I'll read the rest of my outline here, although you can read it. Enlightened private judgment is not bound in conscience if church courts decree wrongly in faith and morals. To use a New Testament phrase, sentences like that are not bound in heaven. And using another New Testament phrase, if such courts aren't wrong, of course, then there is a divine commandment, precept to hearken. And if that is not complied with, that isn't enlightened at all. Berean Christian sort of private judgment, but presumption, damnable sin. And this type of just sentence keeps the many from presumption, like the accused who is in the wrong, fearing the outcome. Well, we see this, to go back to Deuteronomy 17:13. It is good that church courts be armed with authority, and all the people shall hear and fear and do no more presumptuously. And there's something very similar in the New Testament I won't turn to at the moment, 1 Timothy 5:20. The perfect law of God set down in the Bible, and to which the New Testament adds nothing, I think. It gives the church courts authority, certainly, but it gives the church courts no inherent power to bind conscience. In other words, the church courts bind conscience only if they happen to be right, which they are not 100% of the time. And this, I think, is biblical, and I think this is also our Reformed confession in such sources as the Westminster Confession, adhered to by Presbyterians. Well, that's all for this time.